Hi, I'm Seb and I make stuff. And today I'm going to show you how I made these fairy decorations that I used to use for Halloween, but now they're going to become a part of my Dungeons & Dragons cabinet of curiosities. I've still got a few of the original builds from back in the day. They've lost a few of their limbs and a little bit worse for wear, but for the most part, these things are exactly what I'm going to be rebuilding. I got the skeletons from the dollar store. You can get these most of the year round, but you'll especially find them at Halloween time. And aside from that, it's just some craft feathers, a little bit of faux fur, and some cling wrap and timber stain. So the first thing that I'm gonna do with these cheap plastic molds is clean up all of the flashing lines. This stage isn't completely necessary, but it's a little bit of cleanup that I like to do before continuing on with the rest of the build. And now for another section that is fun but unnecessary. This is using a heat gun to reshape the pose of the plastic arms and legs. Using the melted plastic to bend it into a position I like, and then dunking it in the water to help it set hard again. I had a sudden realization that I should pick this pose to fit inside the specimen jar that I plan on finishing the build in. So I ended up pulling both of the arms in towards the center of the body a lot more than I had originally started. And once it's in a pose that you're happy with, it's time to move on to adding the flesh. And for this, we're going to be using Glad Wrap. Basically, you just need to lay out a sheet and cut it to size for your skeleton. This doesn't have to be perfect, as we're going to do a fair few layers of this. Once it's cut back, just start wrapping it around all of the limbs and the body. You can have this wrap fairly loosely, just try and make sure that it all holds onto itself. Then, hit it with the heat gun. If you don't have a heat gun, you can use a hairdryer for this stage. Essentially, you just need a lot of heat to cause the cling wrap to suction back and grip tight against the skeleton. As it pulls back and holds against itself, it really does become a creepy looking flesh texture. Just keep going over any areas that you've missed. The Glad Wrap should stick to itself fairly well, holding everything together. Anywhere that the bone shows through is fine as well. Just think about how old, tight skin would have pulled over years of this thing decaying. Then we are going to punch some holes where the eyes are coming through and hit it with the heat gun to pull the plastic back a little bit. And now the trick to this method of adding flesh to skeletons, or corpsing skeletons, is to layer the entire thing with a timber stain. This ends up looking like a nice old, either burnt or sun-worn leathered skin, and looks brilliant on these. But it needs a day to dry.
24 hours later.
Alright, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not a huge fan of how this stain has turned out. Compared to the original ones that I did all those years ago, the stain just hasn't really stuck to the plastic properly. So I'm gonna test out a few contrast paints now and see if that gives me more of the effect that I'm looking for. Otherwise, I'd just recommend trying a few different stains if you really want to go for this. This old stuff, these things are like 9 years old and they are holding up. For now, let's fix this guy up. Alright, we'll start with a flesh layer. And I'm just gonna dab this all over the areas that I don't feel like got any coloration previously. Alright, now I'm gonna add some snakebite leather to a few sections to give us this idea of old dried flesh. But by adding it in while it's still a little bit wet, we're going to kind of get a little bit of a wet blend. This is actually sticking quite nicely now. Alright, that's getting pretty close to the originals. So after a day to dry, that is looking pretty cool, but it's time to add some wings. For this, we're going to be using some craft feathers. There's a lot of different options out there for these, but I found and really liked these spotted pattern ones with the fluffy grey base. So I started to glue on some of the larger, more intact feathers and got them into a pretty nice position. But then I had a look and decided I didn't want it to look like this fairy was flying, rather I wanted it to look like his wings were tucked down behind his back. So, seeing as it's my build, I just tore it apart and glued it around the other way, trying to make sure I think about how the curve in the feathers would look the most natural on the back of this fairy. And now that looks much better. I love the way that the fluffy section kind of puffs up around his neck as well. But he needs some hair. So I couldn't be bothered to go out and buy a fresh roll of this faux fur, so I'm pulling apart an old Halloween costume that I made. Just cutting off a section of the fur from this armband. This stuff is perfect for this. You just trim it down to be roughly the size of the head, cut it into the right kind of shape, and then glue it to our fairy's head like a wig. And now he's got some hair. It did need a little bit of a trim, so I just grabbed some scissors and cut away the excess to make it sit nice and parallel. And now for a little bit of fun, I gave him a tuft of fur down the middle of his back. Alright, now he's got some style. Time to add a little bit of glue to the eye sockets and then use some of these tiny little foam balls to give him some eyes. And giving them a quick paint in a deep black. And then busting out a scalpel and cutting away some of the plastic around the mouth to reveal the teeth. Finally, I added a few more of the fluffy grey feathers around the back of the neck just to puff up that main area around the fairy's back. And there we go. With a little bit of a trim and a cleanup of his hair, this guy is pretty much ready. And as a way to display them, we're going to be adding them to one of these display jars. These are some regular storage jars that I found at the local Kmart, and I've just stained the base of these, flipped them upside down, and we have got a beautiful specimen jar. I grabbed some basic wire and wrapped it around the belly of the fairy, and I'm going to use this to hold it upright in the display jar. Once I figure out where I want it, I'm going to drill a hole at about the same size as the wire, and then check how high up it's going to actually hold our fairy. We need this to be sitting at the right height for our glass jar, so we're going to pull this out, figure out the right height, and trim this wire down to size. And now that should be perfect for this display piece. Let's stick it in and give it a go. One last touch up of the hair, and we'll seal him away. Beautiful. A perfect addition to our cabinet of curiosities. The fairy turned out pretty damn cool, if I do say so myself. It's fun revisiting some things that I made a long time ago, but adding a lot more of my newer skills to the build. The wings make a big difference, I think, so getting some cool crafty wings if you want to repeat this build at home definitely adds that extra Feywild feel. And there we have another successful build. These jars are coming in handy, and there's probably going to be a few more of the Cabinet of Curiosity builds in the future. For now, he's going to sit on the shelf as a part of my Cabinet of Curiosities. I wonder what I'll build for it next. Until next time, never stop making stuff.